Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Sheikh Mausina, Assistant Professor, Department of Sociology, Puni Devi Chaudhary Girls College, Bolpur, Shantiniketan. The topic of today's discussion is new sites of production and people's resistance in India. Production of goods and services is essential for human survival and socio-economic development of human society. So human society has developed from primitive stage of existence to modern, rather contemporary, globalizing stage of human living, passing through various stages in its development. Economic structure and organization of society has changed radically over time. If we see that in the previous era we had agrarian economy, and then we have moved towards industrial economy, and now we are moving towards the service sector dominated information and knowledge society. In this process, the nature of sites of production has got transformed. The new sites of production are quite different from the old sites of production. Now let us discuss about the nature of production and people's resistance. The economic structure of the society and the mode of organizing production, associated relations of production, the unequal status and life conditions of people are leading to social resistance and struggle by marginalized sections against the dominant hegemonic forces in society, including the state policies which caused marginalization and exclusion of people. Social movements emerged at different levels, which vary in nature, ideology, issues, social base, mode of mobilization, and leadership, which depend on given circumstances in a given context. With the changing nature of the sites of production, the nature of social resistance and movement resulting from that also changes. The old social movements mostly aimed at structural changes which would significantly improve the status of marginalized sections in society. These movements are larger in scale of participation of people and territorial coverage, relatively more organized with specific ideological orientations and leadership such as the peasant movements, tribal movements, movement of industrial working class against the dominant class and the state. The new social movements. In contrast, the new social movements emerged in the post-independence period in last quarter of 20th century India, which were mostly issue-based with limited social base and mainly for policy changes by government rather than structural transformation of society, whether of agrarian feudal or industrial capitalist society. These movements are concerned with different issues such as environmental protection, conservation, women's rights, demand by the farmers for increasing input cost and raising procurement rates of crops for enhancing profit, and identity-based mobilizations. The term new sites of production refers to a geographical place or a territorial space where certain objects, entities, or events are situated or happen to occur. Hence, a site of production would mean a site or place where production takes place, and the items of production could be of similar or different types. When we talk of new sites of production, it would indicate a time dimension in terms of the site being old and new in certain respect, which could be in terms of types of product, nature of organizational structure of production unit, types of resources used for production, purpose of production, market of product for sale, and so forth. Now, people's resistance at the new sites of production in India. The origin of what now we term as people's resistance or new social movements at new sites of production can be traced in India to the introduction of the neoliberal policies of liberalization, privatization and globalization in 1990s. With the adoption of LPG policies, the Indian state started retreating from its welfare functions towards its citizens and moved to the market oriented policies of limited social inclusion. The neoliberal LPG policies have uneven effects on different sections of people, particularly the marginalized sections of society and the working class people such as tribals, peasants, fisherfolks and workers have been affected very adversely. Now let's discuss the causes of people's resistance at new sites of production. Due to the increasing marginalization and exclusion of different sections of society, especially the people dependent on agriculture, forest and water resources, have started collective resistance against the new policies at new sites of globalization linked production to protect their livelihood, resources, and also to stop exclusion and injustice caused to them by corporate led industrialization and growth, which benefit mostly the better off sections of society. These people have organized themselves at several new sites of production at local level and also got support by different activists and mostly non-political organizations. They launched mass resistance perceiving the neoliberal reforms advocated by IMF and World Bank, which threatened their livelihood, security and well-being. Now, let us discuss about the issues of people's resistance at the new sites of production. The people have got mobilized mostly at local level at many new sites of production on different issues such as to protect their livelihood, to improve their living conditions, to resist forcible acquisition of their farmland by the government for corporates and environmental security. So, for example, we can see the recent example of Singur, where people are not giving their land to the government for making the industries and corporations. So, localization of people's protest and diversification of issues are seen as the main features of new forms of resistance. In contrast to the radical revolutionary movements of the past, these new movements do not advocate radical and revolutionary restructuring of society and state through revolutionary struggles. So now we can see that these new sites of production and people's resistance can be divided into two types: resistance at the sage sites and resistance at the non-sage sites. Now, the question comes, what is sage or special economic zones? Sage or special economic zones have been established in several parts of the country with the commencement of the new economic policy of LPG by the Indian state since 1991. Under the LPG regime, special policy measures have been introduced for the establishment of free trade zones in India. In this connection, the EXIM or export-import policy was introduced as a new scheme from 1st April 2000 for the establishment of SAYs in different parts of India. In June 2005, the Indian government passed an act intended to increase exports by legalizing the creation of numerous special economic zones. Now let us discuss about the sage sites and issue of resistance. So we have brought overview of some of the cases of people's resistance at sage sites and issues. It is observed that people's resistance at sage sites are spread all over the country, that is east, west, north and south of India. The main issues raised in the resistance struggle by the people include acquisition of land, rate of compensation paid for the acquired land, displacement of people and resettlement, job availability for the local people, and labor relations. Now let us discuss some of the important examples. The Kakinada Seaports Limited, SAIL. Kakinada SAIL is located in the East Godavari district on the northeast coast of Andhra Pradesh. It is one of the most productive agricultural areas and produces approximately 10% of total food grain production of the state. It is proposed to be a multi-product SAIL. It will cover an area of 9,896 acres and hence one of the biggest SAIL in Andhra Pradesh. In 2006-2007, a very stiff collective resistance emerged against the port-based Kakinada SAIL due to land acquisition for the purpose. Now let me give the example of Nandigram SAIL, West Bengal. The Nandigram is located in the vicinity of industrial city Haldia in the East Mednipur district of West Bengal. The Nandigram SAIL controversy began with the government's decision to allocate Nandigram area to Salim Group of Indonesia for setting up chemical hub under SAIL policy. The Nandigram SAIL required acquisition over 14,000 acres of multi-crop fertile farmland which covered over 27 villages of Nandigram. The farmers resisted at Nandigram for withdrawal of the proposal of setting up the SAIL there. They had a strong fear of forced acquisition of their multi-crop fertile farmland, dispossession and dislocation. As a consequence of collective resistance, the state government assured that the chemical hub was likely to be shifted from Nandigram to Nayachar. Now let us give example of Reliance Mahamumbai SAIL project. The Reliance Mahamumbai SAIL project is proposed to cover 45 villages in Ural, Pen and Panvel taluks of Raigad district of Maharashtra, spread over 10,000 hectares of land area. The Mahamumbai SAIL aimed to develop various infrastructures related projects. For example, roads, industrial and commercial parks, power and water distribution networks, social leisure and recreational facilities. About 1 lakh people of 45 villages would be directly affected by the project of Mahamumbai SAIL, with the Maharashtra government denotifying the land acquired for Raigad. SAIL finally ended because of stiff resistance by the people of Raigad. Now there are also some examples and some cases of resistance at non-SAIL sites. There have been reported various cases of non-SAIL sites of production where people have put up resistance against projects in the recent years. This includes projects initiated or set up by multinational corporations, domestic corporates, big business houses and even government itself. Now let us discuss resistance against Coca-Cola plant at Kerala. In Kerala, we have seen the Coca-Cola company has set up a bottling plant in March 2000 in the wake up of LPG reforms in India. The Coca-Cola company acquired 34.6 acres of land, mostly paddy fields in 1988. Resistance against the Coca-Cola Company was launched by the affected people, their sympathizers, activists on 22nd April 2002 under the banner of Coca-Cola Viruddh Janakiya Samarah Samiti or Anti-Coca-Cola People's Struggle Committee. They held that the company was responsible for the destruction of environment and livelihood resources of people. The resistance was against the privatization of water and powerful transaction corporations, which was fought for the new concerns about environmentalism. Now let me again cite one example of resistance against nuclear plant at Tamil Nadu. The local villagers' resistance to the nuclear reactor project in Kudankulam is one of the recent examples of the resistance at new sites of production. The Indian government signed a contract with the USSR government in 1988 to set up a nuclear reactor project for the generation of nuclear energy in Tamil Nadu. In the same year, the peasants and fisherfolks of the region started their agitation against the project because they realized that the water needed for the nuclear plant would be drawn from an irrigation dam in the region on which they were dependent. Peasants' resistance to land acquisition at Singur, West Bengal. The peasant resistance to land acquisition for Tata Motor projects at Singur in Hooghly district of West Bengal started in May 2006 with the decision of the Left Front government to acquire 1,000 acres of fertile land for the factory. The major issue of the resistance at Singur were acquisition of multi-cropped fertile agricultural land, demand for fair compensation, and unplanned industrialization. As a consequence of stiff resistance by the people, the Tata Motors finally abandoned its car manufacturing projects at Singur, and the land now is being returned to the farmer by the current government. Now, in the conclusion, we can say that it is observed that the introduction of LPG reforms in India since 1990s signifies a shift from domestic-centered, relatively closed economy model to a globally oriented open economy model of development in which both the domestic and external corporations, for example, the multinational corporations, the transnational corporations, etc., are considered the main agency of economic growth and social development rather than the state. The new sites of production, both sales and non-sales sites of production, are mostly linked with the LPG reforms and have emerged, which are generally those of the large corporates that require land, water, forest resources, and the state facilitates the process through acquiring land from the farmers, providing other natural resources. A large number of people, that is farmers, tribal folks, fisher folks, etc., depend on these natural resources for their livelihoods. Most of them depend on forest, and the farmers also depend on the land for their cultivations. The tribal people depend on forest. They are dependent on various things available from the forest for their livelihoods. Hence, acquisition of these resources for corporate business marginalizes the people, threatening their basic livelihoods, and also gives rise to the problems related to fair compensation for acquired land, proper resettlement, etc. As a result, the affected people have launched stiff resistance against the government policy, and the concerned corporate projects in all regions of the country that cause their marginalization and exclusion. Further, it can be said that despite their unique feature of being linked with the contemporary LPG reform, this type of collective resistance of people would come under the category of new social movements in the sense that they are basically issue based, localized, reactive, and socially non transformative in nature. These movements die down once their collective concerns are redressed. They neither have any long term comprehensive societal agenda or ideology, nor stable organizational structure or leadership. Let us summarize so far whatever we have discussed in this module. So, we have seen that with the changes in the new sites of production, the social movements have also changed drastically. The old social movements were generally aimed at the structural changes of the society. And for example, they used to change the total status of the marginalized sections of society. But the new social movement are mainly issue-based social movement. They are not aiming to change the total structure of the society. They are just issue-based and they have limited social base. And they just aim at changing the governmental policies. We saw that resistance did not stop. Oppressive forces will come and go, but people's resistance against the sides of production will not stop. With the change in the capitalist activities and industrial activities, the people's resistance against it is also changing. People are now resisting against the various industries which are taking their lands or say different resources, and they are also started resisting against the governmental policies. So we can see that resistance will not stop. Different oppressive activities will come and go, but the social resistance will not stop. People are resisting against governmental policies and industries also. Thank you.